The slap cracked through the courtroom so sharply, even the flags seemed to flinch. Mom's glasses slid across the polished floor. Dad's voice followed cold and pleased. "You've been useless your whole life." For one breath, the room held still. I stood. My duty belt tugged as I rose. I removed my police cap and set it on the table like a quiet gavel. "Your Honor," I said steady, "check the last page." Dad turned and the color abandoned his face. That moment had roots. I was 8 when I learned silence can be a weapon. The kitchen smelled like burned toast and coffee left too long on the stove. Winter tapped the window with thin fingers. Mom moved carefully, sleeves tugged down to hide the purple moon on her wrist. She set 2 bowls of cereal on the table and folded a smile over the ache. "Eat before it gets soggy," she said. Dad came in heavy-booted, a weather system in a flannel shirt. "Where's my thermos?" he demanded. "On the counter," Mom answered. He snatched it first, eyes on her sleeve. "Clumsy again?" "I dropped a pan," she said. He snorted, pleased to be disappointed. "Figures." His gaze skimmed me and my sister Leah. "I'm not raising 2 princesses who can't do a thing." He shoved the toast so the crumbs jumped. "Burned," he said. "Can't even make breakfast." When the door slammed behind him, the house exhaled. Mom dabbed the counter with a napkin, as if she could erase what lived in the air. "He's just tired," she whispered. "He doesn't have to be cruel," I said. "Finish up," she answered. "School starts soon." The wind bit our ankles on the walk to school. Leah's bootlaces trailed like black tails. "Is Mom okay?" she asked. "She's tough," I told her, polishing the sentence like a coin. In a shop window, a TV showed a police officer lifting yellow tape. The officer's face was calm, no shouting, no flinch. Something inside me clicked like a lock finding home. That afternoon, the house smelled like cornbread. Mom touched my cheek. "How was school, Anna?" "We read about Harriet Tubman," I said. "Brave doesn't have to be loud." "You're right," Mom replied. Dad came home late and drunk. His keys fumbled the lock. He looked at the cornbread, then at Mom. "You trying to make up for this morning?" "It's cornbread," she said. "You like it with honey." "I like a woman who knows her place." His hand shot out and slapped the plate from her grip. It shattered. Leah screamed. I watched crumbs skitter across the tile like yellow confetti from a party no one wanted. "Stop," I said. Quiet, but it drew a line. He turned, surprised a child had dared to exist. "What?" "Stop." He laughed, warm beer mean. "Hear that she thinks she's a cop?" Mom stepped between us so fast her shadow split me. "Please," she told him. "Go lie down. I'll clean this." He shouldered past. Mom crouched and picked ceramic teeth from the floor. I knelt beside her. "You don't have to take this." She gathered shards until their edges bit her skin. "You and Leah need a roof," she murmured. "If I leave, where do we go?" I had no answer that wasn't a fairy tale, so I helped. We cleaned the kitchen, breathing in rhythm like swimmers under the same wave. When we finished, water found the cuts in her hands and she flinched. She shook them dry and smiled small. At night, I made lists, facts, feelings, control. Fact, Mom was kind. Feeling, I was afraid. Control, I could learn to be calm. I could become the person who arrives and says enough. On Sundays, when Dad snored through the afternoon, Mom took us to the park. Leah pumped her legs on the swing. I timed the arcs. Bruises changed colors like sunsets, plum to brown, to yellow, to almost gone. Each time a mark faded, a new one arrived, a season that refused to end. Once a cruiser rolled by. A woman officer lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a small salute. It felt like a key pressed into my palm. Someday I decided I would wear calm. I told Mom while we folded laundry. "I want to be a cop," I said. "I want to be the person who shows up and says, 'Enough.'" She held a towel, halfway weighing me with the gravity she used for real things. "It's dangerous," she said. "But danger doesn't scare you. Seeing people hurt and pretending you can't do anything that scares you." Her seeing me clearly made my eyes sting. "I'll study hard," I said. "Run every morning. Learn the law." She smoothed my hair. "Then do it. But promise me something." "What?" When you're strong, really strong, use it to protect. Don't become the thing that made you strong. I promised. Children make promises like paper boats. Most sink. Mine didn't. It rode every flood in that house, slammed doors, muttered insults, apologies Mom made to the air. It rode the nights I held Leah in the closet while Dad prowled the hall for a fight he could win. It rode until a badge and duty belt replaced the fear I'd worn like a second skin. Years later in that courtroom, when I stood and set my cap down, the paper boat had become steel. But the forging began. Here burned toast, warm cornbread park swings, laundry, and low promises. People think revenge is loud. The truth is quieter. It's a girl learning the weight of a brim and the sound a key makes when it turns. It's patience stocking shelves no one notices until the door opens and the person you've been building walks through. I grew into the quiet. I learned to take notes no one expected to read faces, to hold the right word like a tool instead of a blade. I watched Mom place kindness like sandbags against rising water. I saw the cost of it in her hands. So when the slap landed in court and the room froze, I wasn't just a daughter. I was a promise kept. Your Honor, I said check the last page. The courthouse walls still echoed in my bones, but the memory that pulled me forward wasn't born in oak benches and raised gavels. It lived in a small kitchen where steam rose from chipped enamel pots, and a woman with tired eyes tried to fold hope into every meal. Mom was the kind of woman who could stretch $1 until it squeaked. She carried her bruises like secret heirlooms, hidden under sleeves brushed with powder. To the outside world, she was quiet, maybe even frail. But I knew the truth she was steel that had learned to bend without breaking. She endured because of us. At night, after Dad stumbled into bed smelling of whiskey and cigarette ash, she stayed up under the dim lamplight mending Leah's torn skirt or ironing my uniform. The iron hissed and whispered, her eyes half closed, but her hands steady. I just want you girls to have better, she'd murmur when she caught me watching. Better, the word clung to me. But better meant sacrifice. I remember the way she'd linger at the grocery store calculator in hand, weighing bread against milk. Sometimes she skipped meals and told us she wasn't hungry. We were too young to know hunger leaves fingerprints. Why don't you leave him? I asked once, voice quivering. I must have been 12. She froze over the sink dishwater, swirling around her wrists. For a moment, her back was a mountain I couldn't climb. Then she turned, face softened, but eyes wet. Because leaving isn't free, Anna. He'll take the house. He'll drag you girls through court. Sometimes, staying is the only way to keep the storm inside these walls. I hated that answer, but I understood. Leah needed braces. I needed books. Mom bore the fist so we could carry pens. School was my sanctuary. I stayed late for debate team track practice, anything that kept me out of the house. But every time the bus pulled into our street, my stomach clenched. Would Dad be waiting with a sneer? Would Mom be hiding another bruise? Leah once asked, do you think she still loves him? No, I said too quickly, then softer. She just loves us more. The affair began like smoke you don't notice until the room is clouded. Dad shaved. Moore bought new shirts, smelled of cologne too sharp for the factory floor. His voice changed slick when he talked on the phone. Mom folded laundry with trembling fingers. Her lips pressed thin. She knew. Wives always know. Yet she said nothing. She endured again, holding silence as though it could anchor the family. I hated him more for it. Not just the cheating, the humiliation, the way he strutted in late, whistling like a rooster, while Mom served him dinner as if dignity weren't bleeding out at her feet. One night, Leah burst into tears over algebra. Dad barked figures, useless like your mother. Mom crossed the room before I could move. She sat beside Leah, arms circling her shoulders. You are not useless, she whispered firmly. You are light. You are mine. Leah leaned into her, and I saw it. Mom wasn't powerless. She fought in small ways, shielding, affirming, planting seeds of worth that Dad couldn't uproot. When I graduated high school, Dad didn't show. Mom sat in the bleachers with a bouquet of gas station carnations, eyes shining as if they were roses. You did it, Anna, she said, her voice cracking. Every step you take is proof it wasn't for nothing. I clenched, the diploma heart splitting. For nothing? No. for everything. That night, while Leah slept, I whispered to Mom, "I'm going to the academy. I'll be a cop." Her breath hitched. "Anna, that's dangerous. I know, but it's my way out, and one day I'll have the strength to protect you too." Her eyes brimmed. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her palm was rough scarred by years of scrubbing, sewing, surviving, then promised me one thing. "What?" "When you stand in that strength, don't use it to destroy. Use it to heal what's left of us." I promised, but inside I knew healing sometimes required fire. Years passed. I wore the uniform. I learned the law, the weight of a baton, the restraint of silence. But at home, Mom was still enduring. Dad's mistress had sharpened her claws, whispering poison. He began talking of selling the house, of starting fresh. "Fresh with her," I muttered one night when Mom told me through tears. Mom only shook her head. "I can take losing him, but losing you girls home," her voice broke, "that I can't bear." I looked at her, then shoulders bowed, hair streaked with gray, far too soon. She had given her life to shield us, and he wanted to strip her of even the roof. That night, I began collecting things. Receipts, photos, witness statements. Quietly, methodically, not as a daughter, as an officer. Because Mom had endured enough. Looking back, I realized her endurance was both her prison and her armor. She chose silence so we could speak. She bore pain so we could dream. And though the world saw her as timid, I saw the bravest woman alive. When she trembled in court, pen shaking, as she signed papers that would shred her marriage, I saw every night she had stayed up for us. Every bruise she had hidden, every sacrifice she had made. And I knew this her endurance had bought us time. My strength would buy her freedom. The night it all came crashing down didn't start with thunder, but with the smell of cheap cologne and cigarette smoke that clung to Dad's jacket when he staggered through the front door. I was visiting home on a short break from the academy, my uniform still stiff in its fresh seams. Leah was doing homework at the kitchen table. Mom stood at the stove stirring soup that smelled of onions and garlic, her sleeves pulled low as always. Dad tossed a folded packet of papers onto the counter with a grunt. "Sign it." Mom turned ladle, trembling in her hand. "What is this?" "Divorce," he said flatly. "The girls are grown. You're not needed anymore." Leah dropped her pencil. "What?" Dad didn't even look at her. "Don't make it dramatic. It's overdue." Mom unfolded the pages with shaking fingers. Her lips moved silently over the words. Then she pressed them together, as if trying to hold herself together with sheer will. "I don't want this," she whispered. Dad's laugh was cruel, oily. "Don't want it? Since when do you get to want anything? You think I'm asking? You'll sign." Her eyes flicked toward us, the same look I had seen 1,000 times, a plea not to interfere, not to make it worse. She had endured every storm for our sake, but this storm was ripping the house from its foundation. That night, I followed her to the back porch. She sat on the steps, arms folded tight as if the night air could swallow her whole. The moonlight traced the lines of exhaustion etched into her face. "I can't fight him, Anna," she said softly. "If he wants the divorce, he'll take it all, the house, the savings. I don't have the strength." "You don't have to fight him alone," I said. "You have me." Her smile was faint, weary. "You're my strength, but I can't drag you into this." I wanted to shout that she had dragged me into it years ago when I was a child hiding from his fists, but I bit it back. Instead, I said, "He won't win. Not this time." Inside, the phone rang. Dad's voice slithered through the screen door, low and eager. Sweet words he had never given Mom spilled into the receiver. He was talking to her, the mistress. My fists clenched so tightly the bones ached. The next morning, Mom tried again to reason with him. "We can work this out," she said gently. "For the girls, for Leah." His hand slammed the table, rattling the cups. "Don't talk to me about sacrifice. You've done nothing but hold me back." Her eyes widened, but she didn't cry. She only lowered her gaze the way she always did. Something inside me snapped. Stop blaming her for your failures, I said, stepping into the kitchen. My academy badge caught the morning light sharp against my chest. He turned slowly, his smirk widening. Look at you, pretending that badge makes you somebody. Still my little girl. You'll always do as I say. No, I said, voice steady, though my heart pounded. Not anymore. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. He returned home with the mistress in tow, brazen painted lips smirking as she leaned against our doorway like she belonged there. Mom froze in the living room, wringing her hands. Leah fled upstairs, eyes wide with shame and fury. Dad waved the papers again. Sign or I'll make sure you get nothing. Not the house, not a cent. You'll be lucky if I let you keep your clothes. The mistress sneered, her hand curling around his arm. Do it, darling. End this farce. Mom swayed on her feet, pale as paper. Her voice broke when she whispered, Please, don't do this in front of the girls. Girls? He scoffed. They're old enough to know their mother's worthless. That word worthless struck like a blade. I had heard it my whole life, but hearing it now from his lips, sharpened by another woman's poison, ignited something raw and dangerous inside me. I stepped forward. Enough! He turned, eyes narrowing. You don't tell me what to do? Maybe not before I said shoulders squared, but I'm not 8 years old anymore. That night, when Mom finally collapsed in her room, sobbing into the pillow, I sat awake at the kitchen table. The divorce papers lay crumpled beside me. I smoothed them out, studied them every line of fine print. And I made a decision. If he wanted a fight, I would give him one. Not as his daughter, as an officer. I began collecting everything, old photographs of bruises, hospital receipts, police call logs, even the neighbors' statements about the screaming fights. I kept it all in a folder, locked in my academy-issued case file. Mom had endured too long. The time for silence was over. The last straw wasn't just his demand for divorce. It was the smug certainty in his eyes, the belief that she would break as easily as he snapped a plate or slammed a door. He thought endurance meant weakness. But endurance had given me time to grow teeth. So when the summons came for court, when the date was set, I was ready. Mom trembled as she prepared, whispering prayers that he might show mercy. But I knew better. Men like him don't stop until someone stops them. And I would be that someone. The girl who once whispered, "Stop," in a shattered kitchen had finally found her voice. The courthouse smelled of polish and dust, like old wood soaked with decades of anger and hope. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that floated as if suspended in judgment. The air was heavy, thick, with whispered gossip from strangers waiting on their own cases. But for me, every sound blurred into the hammering of my own heart. Mom sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded tight around a tissue that had already twisted into ropes. She wore her Sunday dress blue with faded flowers, chosen to make her look respectable, though her eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Her lips moved silently, prayers shaping and reshaping. Across the aisle, Dad leaned back in his chair with the swagger of a man who believed the law bent to him. His mistress sat beside him, legs crossed, a thin smile curling her lips. She wore perfume so sharp it carried across the room, cutting through the scent of paper and ink. Her nails drummed the table like a drumbeat of contempt. The bailiff called order, and the judge entered, robes flowing like shadow. Everyone stood. I rose with them, my police cap tucked against my chest, the brim pressing into my ribs. The proceedings began. Lawyers' droned, papers shuffled, but what I remember most is Dad's voice. Confident, practiced cruelty, laced with fake charm. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing toward Mom. "This woman has contributed nothing. I paid the bills, I kept the house. She's had decades of free lodging and meals. Now she'll walk away with what she deserves, nothing." Mom flinched as though the words themselves struck her. Her tissue tore between her fingers. The judge turned to her. "Do you have anything to say, ma'am?" Her lips parted. For a moment, I thought she might speak. But then her shoulders curled inward the way they had 1,000 times at home. I just want peace," she whispered. Dad smirked. "Exactly my point. She has no fight in her. Laughter, sharp and low, rippled from the mistress. Something inside me twisted. My throat burned, but I stayed silent. Timing was everything. Halfway through, Dad grew bolder. He leaned across the table, his voice carrying too loudly for the hushed court. "You hear that, boys? She's admitting she's useless." Mom shrank into her chair, eyes fixed on the floor. Her fingers trembled as she signed the first of the documents handed to her. The pen quivered against paper. Then came the moment. She reached for the second page. Dad leaned over suddenly, his face inches from hers, and in a motion so swift it seemed practiced, he slapped her. The crack ricocheted off the courtroom walls. Gasps erupted. The pen clattered from her hand. "You've been useless your whole life," he spat. The bailiff stepped forward, but the judge held up a hand, shock hardening into cold authority. Silence smothered the room. Mom's breath came ragged, her cheek flaming red. Yet even then, she picked up the pen with trembling fingers, as though determined to finish to surrender if it would end the storm. And I couldn't sit any longer. My chair scraped back. The sound was sharp, final. Every head turned. I rose spine straight, the years of training pressing through my stance. My hand lifted the cap from the table, fingers curling around its brim. Slowly, deliberately, I set it down before me. "Your Honor," I said, voice even, but loud enough to carry. "Please check the last page." The mistress's smile faltered. Dad's eyes snapped to me, fury and sudden unease, warring in his expression. "What are you doing?" he growled. "Sit down." But the judge's hand was already flipping through the stack of papers. My evidence was there, tucked where only I knew to place it. Photographs of bruises, sworn statements, receipts from hospital visits, copies of reports I had pulled through official channels. Years of silence distilled into ink and signatures. The judge's brow furrowed. "What is this?" I swallowed the fire in my throat, keeping my voice calm. "The truth, Your Honor." A murmur spread through the room like wind through dry leaves. Dad shifted in his seat suddenly, less sure of himself. His hand twitched as though to reach for the papers, but the bailiff stepped closer. His mistress's perfume seemed to sour the sweetness, turning rancid in the heated air. For the first time, Mom looked up. Confusion, hope, and disbelief all flickered across her face. She stared at me, her lips parted, but no words escaping. I gave her the smallest nod. "It's okay. You're not alone." The judge cleared his throat, eyes scanning each line with growing gravity. "These are serious allegations. Mr. Callahan, you'll answer to them before this court." Dad's smirk collapsed. "This is nonsense. Fabrications." His voice cracked on the last word. I stood straighter. "Every statement is verified. Every photograph authenticated. The law does not ignore abuse, no matter how long it's been buried." The silence that followed was heavy, reverent, like the pause before a verdict. As the courtroom settled into stunned quiet, I felt something shift. For years, silence had been Mom's shield. But in that moment, silence became my weapon. Every second that Dad's face paled, every heartbeat that stretched as the judge read, was proof that endurance had not been weakness. It had been waiting for this. And I was done waiting. For a long moment, after the judge's voice fell silent, no one breathed. The air was brittle, poised to shatter. My heart thundered so loudly, I was sure the whole courtroom could hear it. Then Dad moved. He slammed both palms against the table, rattling the glasses of water. His chair screeched back. His face burned. Red lips curled in a sneer that showed every cracked tooth of his rage. "You think you're something now? Wearing that uniform, you're nothing but my disobedient little girl." The mistress reached for his sleeve, but he shook her off. He stalked across the aisle toward Mom, who was still hunched fingers, clutching the tissue like it could shield her. "Sign the papers," he hissed. "You don't get to embarrass me in front of all these people." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Callahan." But Dad didn't hear. His rage had deafened him. His arm whipped back, and before anyone could stop him, he struck her again. The crack echoed like a rifle shot. Gasps rippled through the room. The bailiff lunged forward. I was already moving. My chair toppled as I stood. The floor vibrated with the force of my boots. My cap stayed on the table brim, pointed toward the judge like a silent witness. I stepped between Dad and Mom, shoulders squared, pulse iron steady. Enough, I said. The word wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than a shout. The room hushed, waiting. Dad's eyes met mine, surprise flickering there, surprise that I would stand so openly surprised that the daughter who once cowered in corners now blocked his path. His jaw worked. Get out of my way. No, I answered. The bailiff caught his arm, but he jerked free, still glaring at me. His hand rose, the same hand I had seen raised too many times as a child, but this time I didn't flinch. This is a courtroom, I said, my voice sharp as steel, and the law will answer for what you've done. He froze, thrown off by the authority in my tone. The years at the academy, the hours of training, every lesson in restraint, all of it gathered in my stance. I wasn't his daughter in that moment. I was the officer the badge had made me. The judge's gavel cracked. Bailiff, restrain him. The bailiff snapped cuffs over Dad's wrists. He twisted spat curses, but the fight was gone from his eyes. He looked smaller, shackled not just by steel, but by the weight of his own unraveling. The mistress shifted uneasily, her perfume sour now in the stagnant air. She tried to whisper excuses, but the judge silenced her with a glare. I turned back to Mom. She sat trembling, her tissue shredded to confetti in her lap. Her cheek was flushed where his hand had landed. For a second, I saw the little girl in myself again, kneeling on a kitchen floor beside her as she picked up shattered plates. Only this time, she wasn't alone. I knelt beside her, speaking softly, so only she could hear. It's over, Mom. You don't have to take it anymore. Her eyes filled, tears spilling onto the blue flowers of her dress. She reached for my hand, gripping it with surprising strength. Anna, she whispered, you stood up. I swallowed hard, for both of us. The judge cleared his throat, addressing the courtroom. This court will not ignore what has been brought to light. The evidence presented is compelling and will be entered into record. Further proceedings will determine division of assets, but in the meantime, protective measures will be enforced for the plaintiff. Protective measures. Words Mom had deserved decades ago, but had never been granted. The mistress rose, abruptly, voice shrill. This is absurd. He's the provider. The judge's gavel fell. Sit down, ma'am. Her words collapsed into silence. Dad struggled against the cuffs, his voice cracking now with something closer to panic. You think this changes anything? You think she wins because you wear a badge. I turned to him, calm as stone. This isn't about winning. This is about truth, and you can't bury it anymore. The silence afterward was deeper than any shout. People in the gallery shifted, some nodding, subtly others just staring, but the weight of judgment was no longer mine to carry. For the first time, Mom lifted her chin. Her voice was faint but steady when she said, I won't be afraid anymore. It was the bravest sentence I had ever heard. The judge nodded solemnly. That is your right, ma'am, and this court will uphold it. I stood again, straightening my shoulders. My cap remained on the table, a silent testament to the shift that had just occurred. I wasn't a girl hiding behind silence anymore, and Mom wasn't a woman bound by fear. We had taken the stand together. The clink of the handcuffs settled into the room like a clock, finally striking the hour it had promised all along. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked to me. Officer Callahan, you indicated there is additional evidence on the record. Walk me through it. Yes, Your Honor. My voice sounded different to my own ears, measured, deliberate. What you have in the last section are 3 categories: documentation of abuse, financial misconduct, and corroborating witness statements. Paper whispered as the clerk separated the packet. Photographs came. First date stamped in the corners, a cheekbone swollen like rising dough purple shadows along Mom's forearms, a split lip salted by tears. The judge's jaw hardened. The gallery went quiet. These images span 10 years, I said. Most were taken by me, some by emergency nurses when my mother came in with falls that didn't match the injuries. Each image links to a hospital intake or a police welfare call. Dad made a sound, a cornered animal growl. The bailiff's hand tightened on his elbow. The mistress stared at the scuffed toe of her shoe. The judge tapped a photo with his pen. And the statements. 4 neighbors, I said, lifting a stapled set. 2 called 911 on separate nights reporting yelling items thrown, a woman screaming. Both times my mother refused to press charges, citing fear of retaliation. I paused. She had 2 daughters sleeping down the hall. Mom's fingers knotted around mine under the table. Next, I said, letting my tone turn colder, financial misconduct. I laid out bank statements in neat rows. Withdrawals coincide with hotel receipts and jewelry purchases, items never gifted to my mother. There are also cash transfers to a personal account held by Ms. Avery. I believe gifts is the word you're reaching for. The mistress snapped. The judge didn't look at her. Counsel will advise your client to remain silent unless addressed. His gaze slid to Dad. These transfers, were they made with marital funds? My money is my business, Dad said, trying for swagger. In a marriage, the judge answered, your money is our business. I turned the next page. There's also a quitclaim deed drafted, but not executed, prepared by Mr. Callahan to transfer the house to an LLC formed last year. The timing corresponds to Ms. Avery's increasing presence. Alleged, Dad's attorney inserted weakly. Documented, I said, sliding forward the state filings. This was an attempt to strip my mother of the home she has maintained for 28 years. The judge read, expression flattening. Why bring this now, officer, and not years ago? I breathed. Because I was a child. Because my mother asked me to keep the storm inside our walls. Because some kinds of safety require timing. Today, she asked for peace. This is the road to it. Mom squeezed my hand. The clerk set one more packet on the bench. The judge flipped it open and stilled. Audio recordings. Yes, Your Honor. Legally obtained in a one-party consent state. I kept my voice steady. You'll hear Mr. Callahan threatening to sell the house if my mother refused to sign and disappear. You'll also hear Ms. Avery encouraging him to finish her off in court so they could start fresh. Ms. Avery went paper white. That's out of context. Context, the judge said evenly, is what trials are for. Today is about protection assets and credibility. He nodded to the clerk. Speakers crackled. My father's voice filled the courtroom, lazy cruelty, whiskey slicked. She's had it good on my dime. She can take a bag and get out. I'll see her on the curb with her little charity smile. Then Miss Avery stopped coddling her. File win and move me in. The house won't even remember her name. When the audio clicked off, the room felt colder. The judge closed the file. Mrs. Callahan, he said, using the name she was poised to relinquish, you will not sign anything today. This court issues an immediate protective order. Mr. Callahan, you are barred from the marital home pending a full hearing. A forensic accountant will evaluate dissipation of marital assets. Dad surged to his feet. The cuffs jerked the chain. You can't throw me out of my own house. I can, and I am, the judge replied. Sit down. He sat. A knot loosened at the base of my throat. I put a hand on Mom's back. Warmth came through the fabric, a line of heat under my palm. Thank you, she whispered. We're not finished, I told her. But you don't have to be afraid tonight. The clerk marked the orders. The bailiff adjusted his stance. Paper became law, ink a shelter. Dad stared at me, confusion dimming his fury. He had built himself a mirror that only reflected his power. Today, it cracked. In the fragments, he finally saw the truth. We weren't afraid of him anymore. The judge stacked the files and let a thread of warmth into his voice. This court recognizes endurance. It should not be mistaken for consent. We will reconvene for distribution. For now, the plaintiff is protected. He looked up. Officer Callahan. Good work. A flush rose to my cheekbones. Thank you, Your Honor. As the bailiff led Dad toward holding Miss Avery, hissed, You'll regret this. He always lands on his feet. Not on our backs, I said. We left the courtroom slowly learning how to walk in a world that tilted differently. Outside, the sky had that pale, scrubbed color it wears after a storm. "Where will we go?" Mom asked. "Home," I said. "Tonight, home is ours." She nodded. The red print of his hand had already begun to fade. People think unveiling is a sudden light thrown on truth. Sometimes it's the slow lighting of a house room by room, until you realize there has always been a way through. We had found the switches. We were turning them on. The courthouse steps felt different under my boots than they had on the way in. The air smelled sharper, like autumn had finally decided to arrive. Mom walked beside me, her hand trembling in mine, though for once it wasn't from fear, it was from the unfamiliar weight of relief. Behind us, the doors swung shut. Dad was still inside, the clink of handcuffs echoing in my memory like a final punctuation mark. For years, I had watched him write the story of our family with his fists and his fury. But today, that story ended. Mom inhaled deeply, her first free breath in decades. "Anna," she whispered, voice breaking, "I never thought I'd see this day." I looked at her, really looked. The lines of sacrifice carved into her face, the silver threading through her hair, the resilience that had never truly been broken. "You earned it," I said. "Every ounce of this freedom is yours." Her eyes glistened. "No, we earned it. You stood when I couldn't." I shook my head. "Mom, you stood every day. You held this family together even when he tried to tear it apart. I just carried what you taught me into this courtroom." That evening, we returned to the house. The silence inside felt different, no longer charged with waiting for the next storm. Leah was already there, her eyes red from crying. But when she saw Mom's face calm, lifted, she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around her. "He can't hurt you anymore," Leah whispered. Mom kissed the top of her head. "Not anymore." I watched them, my chest tightening, with something I hadn't felt in years, peace. Later, as Mom brewed tea in the kitchen, I walked through the rooms. The walls carried scars, faint outlines where plates had shattered doors with dents from fists. But tonight, those scars felt like history, not prophecy. For the first time, the house belonged to us. The following weeks were a blur of hearings, signatures, and endless paperwork. Dad fought tooth and nail, but each piece of evidence was another door closed to him. The mistress stopped showing up after the recordings were played in open court. His swagger shrank into muttered denials that no one believed. Finally, the verdict came. The judge's words fell like a steady drumbeat. The house awarded to Mom joint accounts split. Fairly restitution owed for medical expenses long buried under excuses. Most importantly, a permanent protective order he could no longer come within 200 feet of her. When the gavel fell, Mom pressed her face into her hands and sobbed. Not from grief, from release. I leaned close. "It's over." She shook her head gently. "No, Anna, it's just beginning." On the day she received the deed to the house, she placed it on the kitchen table like it was sacred scripture. Her fingers brushed the embossed seal. "I never believed I'd hold this," she murmured. "You held us," I reminded her. "This is only proof." She looked at me, then eyes shimmering. I used to think endurance was weakness, but maybe it was strength waiting for its moment. I nodded. "And today you got it." At night, I sometimes sat on the porch steps where she used to cry alone. The wood was weathered, but it no longer felt haunted. It felt like a sentry post. From here, I could see the streetlight casting steady gold, not the flicker of danger, but the glow of protection. I thought about the little girl who once whispered, "Stop," in a kitchen filled with broken plates. She had grown into a woman who said enough in a courtroom filled with silence. And the difference wasn't just a badge or a uniform, it was a promise kept. The last time I saw Dad was across a courtroom months later. He looked older, smaller, diminished in a way I had never imagined possible. His eyes flicked to me once, but they slid away quickly, as though he couldn't bear the reflection staring back at him. Mom stood tall beside me. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was no longer submission. It was victory. People often imagine revenge as fire, loud, consuming. But true revenge, the kind that endures, is quieter. It's the silence of a woman who no longer trembles, the stillness of a daughter who no longer flinches, the calm after a storm when the sky clears and the house is still standing. That's what justice looked like for us. Not a shout, a silence. If you're listening now, maybe you've carried storms of your own shadows that whispered you were worthless, voices that told you to stay small. Maybe you've endured more than anyone will ever know. I want you to remember this: endurance is not weakness. It is the soil from which strength grows. And when the time comes, when the silence finally breaks, you will find that you were stronger than they ever believed. So take courage, hold on, and when the moment arrives, stand tall. Because sometimes the quietest victories are the loudest of all.